Welcome back. The G20 Leaders Summit is around the corner and the government is busy trying to build consensus on the document and the wording of the Ukraine-Russia war. It will be important for India to have a consensus document to send out a strong message about its presidency. To talk about India's G20 preparation, the possible outcomes, is former Minister of State for External Affairs, former diplomat and now Congress MP, Mr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much for joining us. How important is it for India to have a consensus at this G20, which looks difficult at this stage?
Well, look, I think we're busy dialing down expectations, understandably, because normally, yes, it would have been very important because the success of every summit is reflected in a joint communique. And every single G20 summit, including the last one in Indonesia last year, concluded with an agreed joint communique. This will be the first one without it. So India has to really make a serious effort to spin it in a way that it doesn't look like a failure. The problem is that it's really one issue that's holding it up. I think India has done a reasonable job on all the other complicated, thorny issues, debt relief, some of the development agenda issues, admission of the African Union. There are various issues. They've tried to bring in language that makes everyone happy. But when it comes to Ukraine, the Russians and Chinese are absolutely unwilling to budge. They want no reference to it, no condemnation, not even deploring the war. And the West says, no way we will agree to a joint communique which doesn't mention Ukraine. So you've got a stalemate. And we may end up once again with a sort of chairman's summary, which is a very lame, limp conclusion to what has otherwise been such an extravaganza of a G20 year. So it's a bit unfortunate. I don't think it's fair to blame India entirely. The way in which the conflict has evolved, it's become impossible to find a solution. Perhaps they could have anticipated this problem earlier because they already ran into this difficulty when the finance ministers met and when the foreign ministers met. Maybe something could have been done earlier to find a solution. Whatever it is, we're not involved in the inside of it, so we don't know. It didn't happen, and right now it looks extremely unlikely. Certainly a consensus seems totally elusive at the moment.
Right. The absence of Putin and Xi Jinping at the meeting, does it really affect things, the success of the summit overall?
Putin, no, because I think it's been pretty much a pattern now that he's missing most international engagements except within a tight circle of his own immediate neighbors and allies. He hasn't been to the BRICS summit last month in South Africa. He is clearly, if I'm not mistaken, he was absent from Bali in Indonesia as well last year. And his being absent this year is not a surprise. And this is a guy with an international arrest warrant against him. He's prosecuting a war, which is not popular in the world. He knows that if he comes here, he's going to become a lightning rod for negative attacks and criticism by other countries and other leaders. There might be photo moments when people don't shake his hand, all of this stuff. So he says, why do I need this? He's backed off. No surprise there. Xi is much more of a political signal. That is a deliberate snub to India, because she was there at BRICS, and he's going to be holding a Belt and Road tamasha in Beijing shortly, which Putin will attend. So I think it does look pretty grim for us. But my attitude is, if it's grim because we are standing up for our rights with the Chinese, then so be it. I would like to believe that this government has developed a spine since the Prime Minister's most unfortunate statement that the Chinese have taken no territory, when it's known to everybody that the status quo ante, that is before the troubles in Galwan in April to June 2020, has not been restored in many, many points. We had an informal modus vivendi with the Chinese that we would both armies would patrol alternate days, whatever, so they wouldn't get in each other's way. 45 years, the disputed frontier was not a problem area simply because each side respected the other's claims.
Right.
Suddenly, the Chinese have moved into lots of spots, I believe 26 spots, where both sides used to patrol, and now the Indian Army can no longer patrol. They've taken over lands where Ladakhi herders used to graze their sheep and whatever, and they can't graze anymore. These are things that you can find out on the ground. Rahul Gandhi went to Ladakh and met herders who've been talking about that. So if the government were to just go out of their way to appease the Chinese when all this is happening, it really would have sent a bad signal. So I would rather that if India took a tough stand, decided it's going to scrub its kowtowing to China, and as a result Xi didn't come, great. But if it's Xi simply saying, listen, we don't want to take you guys too seriously, you made such a big hoo-ha of this G20, let's see how important it looks without us, that kind of message, then frankly, that is going to be seen around the world as a bit of a snub to us.
How do you think the Prime Minister and the government has been able to portray India or send a message about brand India through this G20 summit?
Now, that's been an impressive thing, because I think no other G20 presidency has made the G20 to such an extravaganza. We've had over 200 meetings during these basically 9 months of our presidency. It's not a full year because we only took over from Indonesia on the 1st of December last year. So in 9 months, over 200 meetings, 58 cities, 32 different work streams. You've had this People's G20 concept with the University Connect and Jan Bhagidari and Hornbill Festival and all sorts of things. A cultural G20, a parliamentarians G20, a think tankers G20. It's been amazing in that respect. There I give full marks to the government that they really took what could have been otherwise treated as a routine diplomatic effort to be dealt with by a handful of so-called Sherpas and essentially forgotten afterwards, which is the case of all the previous G20 ones, and made it into something that really has showcased a certain prominence in a very dazzling way of Indian interests. But having said that, in the diplomatic world, there are some challenges. We're talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and hope and harmony and healing in the world. Well, we need hope and harmony and healing in our own country with what's happening in Manipur, in Gurgaon, in various places that we read in the headlines every day, in New, for example. And the sort of the unpleasant news. Foreign delegates are not unaware that we're talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam at home, abroad, and weaponizing identity politics at home. I think the sooner that India, and by this I mean the Indian government, get its act together domestically, the greater will be our credibility abroad. If you read the foreign press around the G20, it's almost uniformly saying exactly this. Financial Times today, same message, great G20, but look at what's going on inside the country, which is giving itself.
But is the Congress going to raise this issue with foreign leaders when they arrive in the country? Of course, the security is going to be very tight. They will be in one particular venue and their hotels. But will the opposition try and raise these issues with them?
I don't think so. First of all, we have to fight our own battles at home. We're not sort of, kindergarten school children rushing off to the visiting VIP to get our problems solved. We can fight our own battles. So I don't think we're going to be raising it with foreign countries. Having said that, I've always believed that, ultimately when it comes to foreign policy and international interests, we're all Indians. Ultimately, that India must look good to the world and must have a position of prominence as in all our collective interests. I just want the Indian government not to give our critics abroad the easy excuses they have to attack us because of the government's and the ruling parties' misbehavior in some very unfortunate areas. As I say, if you look at the foreign press these days, it doesn't make for happy reading. And that's a pity given all the effort the government has put in. But it could easily have been avoided if the government had only played its hand differently at home.
Right. In terms of certain diplomatic messaging and the challenges for India that you would be watching out for, what are some of those cues that would be important to watch out for at the G20?
Well, I think, frankly, everything is pretty much stitched up before the heads of state get here. So I think the clues are pretty clear. We're not likely to have an agreement on a joint communique. We're going to have 3 heads of state missing, of which the biggest name is going to be Xi Jinping's absence. I believe the Mexican is also not coming, and of course Putin is not coming. Everyone else pretty much is here. I don't think we should expect any other major surprises during the summit. I'm not thrilled about the extraordinary security measures and all sorts of things which are going to be inconveniencing ordinary citizens of Delhi for 3 full days. I think about the daily wage workers, the hawkers, the chaiwalas, and so on, whose livelihoods will essentially be gone. And many of these families...
Do you think it's a bit too much?
I think it's a bit too much. I think when a chaiwala or a tea cart or a vegetable or fruit seller on a cart, or an istriwala for that matter, when they don't make money on a particular day, their families don't eat that day. So depriving them of their livelihood for 3 days was unnecessary and unfortunate. I think some of these things the government has gone overboard. But that's also typical of our security establishment. Everything is overboard. And I suspect it's going to be a nightmare even trying to get onto the streets of Delhi on those 3 days. But having said all of that, we probably will and probably should put on a summit like no other, like none that they've seen in any previous G20s. That would be the Indian success story.
My final question, has India been successfully able to emerge as the voice of the Global South, the bridge between the Global South and the West?
That's the challenge. and I would say we're only been partially successful. The global south is the developing countries, another word for it, the G77 as it used to be. And we've been able to speak for them in some areas. But take, for example, the consequences of the Ukraine war, which have driven up prices everywhere, caused food scarcities in many of these countries, have really affected the economies of the global south. Between sanctions by the north on Russia and the interruption, for example, of wheat and grain exports from Ukraine and Russia and so on, a lot of innocent developing countries in the global south have suffered. Where have we been able to solve that problem? There's a limit to how much we can do. We are feeding ourselves. We're able to actually go around the sanctions with Russia by importing oil with the West accepting that situation, but we've not been able to solve all the problems of the global south in the process. There may be language in the communique or in the chairman's summary that reflects our concerns and the South's concerns, but I wouldn't say more than that. This bridging role is something that our foreign minister has openly said is going to be a major role for India to play. South to north, east to west increasingly, but I think we shouldn't honestly take on more than we can realistically accomplish, because then we would be judged to have failed by an impossible yardstick.
Right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Dr. Tharoor, and giving us a sense of India's G20 priorities and how much can realistically be achieved as well. Thank you once again for watching News Center. Goodbye.